Good evening and welcome to the Festival of Failure, our first virtual Festival of Failure. I'm Chris Stoltz. I'm Professor of Practice in Engineering at La Trobe University, and I'm also Managing Director of Spatial Partners, a specialist engineering and geospatial IT company. The Festival of Failure is a celebration of everything that can and does go wrong. It's the standout event of the Bendigo Invention and Innovation Festival, where we hear about spectacular failures that have driven success. If you're an entrepreneur, a startup or business owner, failure isn't a choice, it's part of the game. It's how you learn. And if you're open to it, it's how you grow. Let's kick this evening off with a poll about failure as an essential part of success. We've all experienced failure. We want to know how you bounce back from failure. Was it livelihood, family, blind faith, fear of missing out, pursuit of success, self-belief? Take a look at the poll and enter your responses, and we'll come back to it shortly. Our inspiring speakers this evening will share their path to success through stories of failure, risk-taking and sleepless nights. So grab yourself an online beverage and join us for a night of epic fails. This year marks the 10th anniversary of the Bendigo Invention and Innovation Festival. The 2020 BIIF is themed Optimism Through Innovation and includes a 5-week festival with over 80 speakers across 40 sessions. Our hope throughout the festival is for you to gain ideas, skills and tools to make innovation and change happen. If you'd like to find out more, visit BIIF, that's BIIF.com.au. And the Festival of Failure is made possible by our session partner, Australian Turntable Company. Visit their website at turntables.com.au, and on your behalf I thank them for their support. Okay, we have an amazing cross-section of people this evening. Let's welcome first Andrew Jones, passionate problem solver and co-founder of a number of businesses, most recently New 21. Hello, Andrew.
Good to be with you.
Great, thank you. Dr. Alex Moritz, a corporate entrepreneur turned academic professor of entrepreneurship, La Trobe Business School. Hello, Alex.
Good evening, Chris, and good evening, everybody.
And we've got Rebecca Miller, inquisitive and dedicated, social media marketing specialist and Aussie Rules football player with Richmond. Hi, Rebecca.
Hey, Chris. Great to be here tonight. Looking forward to it.
And we've also got Gabriel Seymour, physiotherapist, pianist, sport devotee, and also a Richmond AFLW player. Hello, Gabby.
Hi, Chris. How's it going?
Good, thanks. And Adrian Pulfer, a passionate teacher, designer, award winner, and true creative with some of the world's biggest brands. Hi, Adrian.
Hello, Chris and everyone. Great to be here tonight. So
you've now responded to the poll there, and it looks very interesting. Livelihood 19%, pursuit of faith 19%, blind faith and fear of missing out are quite low, and self-belief is leading the field. That's very interesting. So, and while we're on screen, livelihood just jumped up a bit, that's good. Also on your screens, you should have an ask button. Now during the session, you can use this feature to ask questions right throughout the presentations. And I'll do my best to make sure we connect you with our speakers during the evening. Andrew, let's start with you. You started your career journey at age 8 by pulling apart a remote control car to make it better. And now your career has seen you designing iconic products for Nestle, Coca-Cola, Red Bull. Can you tell us your journey through failure to success?
Yeah, thank you, Chris. So my father had bought me that remote control car, would have seen it as an epic fail. First up, that it didn't survive being played with for very long before I took it apart. And that really was the start of my making as a designer, as a design engineer, and then moving into product, service design, and also training and coaching teams and individuals to be more creative, curious, and innovative. But what I actually want to share with you all tonight is actually the story of how perceived failures and perceived barriers actually become the making of you. So I, along with 15% of the population, am dyslexic. And that in a traditional world is perceived as failings, and we fail at traditional systems and processes. So I'm going to talk to you about how we can actually be a bit better by dyslexia. And it's quite common that dyslexics become designers and engineers for some interesting traits that I'm going to share with you today. But to kick us off, here is a wonderful quote by a very good friend of mine, Dr. Richard Harmer, who's a developmental psychologist in our team. And when he's working with organizations, this is one of the biggest things that crops up. So everyone has two jobs at work. Our two jobs. The first job is what it says in your job description, okay? And the second is not to mess up. So I've adjusted the language there, but not to mess up. And we consciously manage these things going on all the time. And actually we expend a lot of our energy, emotional energy, worry, anxiety, fears. We spend most of our energies on the second job that we do, the trying not to mess up. So if we could get to a world where actually we could free ourselves from this, what could we actually create? What could we become? And so it becomes quite interesting for people that are dyslexic, because we don't traditionally fit in the ways of working, the systems of work and the systems of learning. We process information differently. We're challenged by the traditional systems, and we struggle to meet traditional benchmarks in education and employment. And this is because we are trying to create one size fits all. But actually, what's quite interesting is when you start thinking that 15% of our population think differently and have dyslexia. So actually, how do we start bringing it forward and sharing these skills as well? Because the world that we live in is actually far from traditional. It's changing all the time, constantly changing. And we're obviously seeing that play out in front of our eyes, where we're seeing the speed and pace of change accelerate things. It's often described that we live in a VUCA world. This is far from traditional and fixed. So VUCA stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And then all of a sudden, when you start looking through the lens of traditional systems, ways of working, traditional ways of thinking, traditional ways of operating, all of a sudden we start seeing that actually the world is challenging us to think and act differently. And we are required to bring these skills. Now, what's quite interesting is the natural dyslexic approach starts thinking differently as to how we do these things. So here is a list of the top 10 skills listed by the World Economic Forum for what we need to utilize to not just survive, but thrive in this current world. Complex problem solving, critical thinking, creativity, people leadership, the list goes on. These are called super skills. These are human-centric skills. We all have the capability within us. Now, what's interesting is dyslexics might be more prone to think and be able to build these skills. But actually, what's interesting about skill sets is they're not unique to people. They're not a gene set. So creativity, curiosity, and innovation are skill sets, not gene sets. And the great thing about skill sets is that we can learn them, we can develop them, we can practice them. And just thinking that the World Economic Forum is listing the top 10 skills that we need to thrive in this current world, we can look at how we start building these in our teams, how we start questioning and challenging traditional ways of working, traditional ways of learning, to start embodying these super skills to take us forward in this VUCA world. Innovation is a journey of discovery into the unknown. So I've spent the best part of 20 years of my career innovating, firstly on behalf of other organizations, coming up with the ideas, the processes, the systems for them. And then the latter part of my career that I am very passionate about is about embedding these skills in other people and training people to innovate. But it's a journey of discovery into the unknown. by its very nature, if we knew about it, we'd be doing it. So we don't. We've got to explore. And the thing about a journey of discovery into the unknown is it's laden with fear and anxiety, and it's laden with failures. If you knew what you were going to do, you'd be able to build a plan, you would be able to do it, you would have already done it. You don't know. There are too many unknowns, so we've got to explore going forward and build up this insight, this knowledge, this capability. So fear is a natural part of the human process, or natural part of being human, sorry. So we need to develop a human process that allows us to overcome fear. And that is all about learning by experimentation. And here is a great quote from another, dare I say it, famous and successful innovator who's a dyslexic. So Thomas Edison, dyslexic, came up and said this great quote, "I have not failed, I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." This approach is being adopted by leading organizations as to how they innovate. We adopt it into all levels of society as to how we innovate, how we explore new things, because fear of failure is actually a real thing. It's a barrier. It stops people doing things. So we must overcome that. And we do that by doing iterative cycles of prototype, learn, refine. So what my friend Tommy here should have said is, rather than focusing on the failure, which is why we're talking about it, is actually I conducted 10,000 micro experiments. Each one took me one step closer to the development of the light bulb. And what's interesting is when you start looking through this lens of saying, okay, I can look at things differently. I can challenge the status quo. I can question, I can explore, and I can provide data through micro experiments, which reduces the fear. Because if I fail at any step, I am making a discovery. And every discovery is a win because it gives you data, it gives you insight, it gives you another step further in your journey of discovery into the unknown. So failure through a different lens is a discovery. And that is incredibly powerful because that is what makes our world go forward. So in a traditional world where we see the lack of being able to retain facts and information, being able to traditionally learn, memorize, and recite things as a failing, we look through it as a discovery into a new world. And like so many others that have gone before us, here is a snapshot of some famous dyslexics who have all changed the world that we live in and have navigated a VUCA world in their own way. Discovery can take you anywhere.
Thanks, Andrew. That's really inspiring. And you've given us a real insight at a human level, at a personal level. But you've also mentioned, or I mentioned actually, those big name companies, Nestle, Coca-Cola, Red Bull, and so on. And we can also add Apple. You've mentioned Apple, IBM, GE, Thomas Edison, Google, etc. At a company level, are these companies too big to fail, or do they just hide failure somewhere in their operations?
Well, they far from hide failure, Chris. They actually embrace failure as part of their process, part of their methodology, part of their approach. As we explored then, if you are not failing, you're not taking those steps forward. You're not micro-experimenting. But it's the perception of failure. If we view it through the lens that actually it's not a failure, it's a discovery. I've learned something. I can now adapt my thinking. I can adapt my learning. I can pull in these different data points and make a decision about moving forward. So these big organizations, they have been built on successive failures. I conducted 10,000 micro experiments to build a global giant that is General Electric. So it's happened, and this is what we've got to keep doing. Unfortunately, what we got good at in our real world is focusing on efficiency and trying to drive that success metric and then putting KPIs around it. And all of a sudden, we start making failure a dirty word. But in innovation, it is part of the process, but it's looking through the lens at failures as discoveries, and all of a sudden, every discovery is a win. So they're not too big to fail.
And
they do it day in, day out.
And this would be true of companies like Tesla as well, do you think?
Absolutely.
Yeah, right.
Every organization that is innovating and is at the cutting edge of what they do is constantly learning, refining, and adapting.
Okay, we'll have a quick little quiz question here. You don't have to take it too seriously. And we mentioned Tesla. I mentioned earlier that you pulled apart a remote control car to make it better. Tell us how you would help Elon Musk make his cars better if you could pull one of them apart.
Well, Tesla's doing pretty well at the moment. Their stock price is rising faster than any other car company on the planet. And having watched a program the other day where they had a drag race of the Tesla versus the fastest V8 currently available in Australia, unfortunately, the V8 was left standing, or fortunately, if you want to look at this new way, and left standing by some distance as well. So the product itself is actually pretty good. But for me, being a passionate designer about saying, well, how do we keep making things better? So while electric vehicles themselves are in their operation better for the planet, I would actually start looking at the production of them and start saying, okay, these rare earth metals that we ship around the world to make the batteries and the systems that come together, there's more work to be done there. The cradle to grave approach of saying, how do we get a circular economy, a circular design process coming back where actually we're recycling, reusing, repurposing vehicles. So that is a really nice design challenge that a lot of organizations are facing at the moment. And it's one that I would very much like to get my teeth stuck into with Tesla.
Oh, that's terrific. Well, thanks, Andrew. We'll come back to you with a few questions later. We might now move on to Alex. Alex, you've had a multinational career that includes roles in entertainment with Sony PlayStation on one hand, and big pharmaceutical companies like Boots and GlaxoSmithKline on the other. Tell us what the link is and something about your failures on the way.
Well, thanks for the intro, Chris, and hi to all our, hi to our viewers, and people participating in this lovely webinar. If I could possibly just expand on Andrew's lovely insights there, and something that I just keep as a personal motto, that fear of failure is actually a disabler for entrepreneurial and innovative behavior, whereas learning from failure is an enabler for entrepreneurial and innovative behavior. And I just try to see that as a positive aspect the whole time. Anyway, more in context with what you've just mentioned, Chris, I started off my career in the corporate sector in sales and marketing. And for all my sins, I ended up as Chief Operating Officer at Sony PlayStation. And then about 10 years thereafter, for a short stint of a year or two, as Managing Director of Blockbusters Entertainment. But a little bit more about that later. And of course, there were failures along the way. As I said just now, as a failure being an enabler, how could we learn if we do not fail? And then just looking back on that corporate type of career, is my first failure was that I actually didn't pivot out of pharmaceuticals and FMCG, which is fast-moving consumer goods, soon enough. I spent over a decade in that sector, and I should have actually followed my entrepreneurial passion and exited sooner. I was always questioning the status quo, and trying to expand on things. But in those industries, everything was relatively set. And particularly since I worked for such large corporations, there were a lot of rules, policies, and procedures. And there wasn't really that innovative flair from being different. The other thing that kept me there was, as many people do, is you climb that corporate ladder and you move up and up and up, and you kind of get to a position where you're in although you're working hard, but you're in a relative comfort zone, and you don't want to lose those comforts. It may be a flashy car, a flashy title, or whatever it may be, and the status that comes with that. I must say, when I moved over to PlayStation, it was absolutely awesome. The highlight of my career. To our younger people there tonight, my job there wasn't as a gamer. It wasn't as a developer. It was basically triple bottom line to run the business, which is vastly different from the entertainment it brings and so on. Obviously, that's our value proposition to our customers, but that's not the job that I did. And to be honest with you, one of the most difficult things in that position was managing those creative and innovative people, the gamers, the developers, the marketing people, and so on, because we had to be out there and be different with PlayStation's marketing and so on. And every day was different there. We launched approximately in the first, let's average 10 years of the business, we launched about close to between 8 and 20 new games every single month. Now, one game takes a total development of, in those days, over a year or two's development. So just extrapolate that over thousands of games and how that business actually went. And then we had lots of foreign exchange regulations from purchasing the product from the parent companies and that kind of stuff. But I'm going to discuss some of the biggest problems and the things we learned in that business that I've been able to put over into startups in the current environment I'm in. Anyway, I then moved over to Blockbusters just for a few years. And that's still when the old video store concept, very much the video easy kind of business, just a lot bigger. Where before that business was actually disrupted. And as I sit now speaking to everybody, basically that business does not exist anymore because of disruption and technology and so on. So what did we learn? Well, that's a long, long story. It's going to take us hours just to discuss that. Anyway, I then moved to education by default. It was a passion I had from my youth when I immigrated to New Zealand many years ago, stayed there, rugby passion and so on. And here I am years later as a professor of entrepreneurship at La Trobe Business School, loving every minute of it. Yes, I do a lot of research, but a lot of it is engagement and daily interaction with startups and the challenges these startups face. But this is probably the biggest thing I learned. And I learned this from failing by not doing it properly. I thought by having all this, let's call it executive experience in corporates, that I knew a lot of business things. And I suppose I had to. And anyway, what I did learn, and this is a very important thing, is that startups are not small versions of big companies. I often hear of people coming in to mentor and experts coming in, and I don't take anything against corporate executives and so on. But very often they don't have that skill set of the uncertainty and the risk associated with startups. And that's just one big thing I had to overcome when I actually moved over by default from corporate to, let's call it, to working with startups as what I do every day of my life now.
Yeah. Terrific. Thanks for that, Alex. I think I remember reading somewhere that you were involved with the Sony PlayStation global launch when you were there. Did that global launch go as planned?
Well, that's easy to answer, Chris. No, it didn't.
Tell us about it.
Okay, look, let me rather give you the outing of my 10 years there. In the 10 years that I was at PlayStation, within 3 months, we were the market leader. 10 years later, we were the market leader. And I think for 7 years in a row since launch, internationally, we were the favorite Christmas present globally. Yeah. So things did go well, but there were a lot of headaches. I'll explain a few of them and the learning from that and how I can apply some of those things to innovative companies now, or startups, scale-ups, and that type of thing. Yes, so it certainly wasn't an exciting part of my life, Chris, as I mentioned. There were lots of creative juices flowing in the business, but many, many challenges. If I can isolate, the biggest challenge we had when we launched Sony PlayStation was intellectual property infringement. infringement of our IP, what people commonly refer to as piracy. For those people in the audience that do know PlayStation was a disc. So, we were the global pioneers and transformation agents in technology disruption in the entertainment industry going back 20 years. And in those days, we launched Sony PlayStation at the same time as DVD video was launched. So for those of you that can still remember the VHS and beta discs you put in your video machine to watch movies, DVD then came out, and that's the time then we launched PlayStation. So, we transformed the home entertainment market from where people used to go to video arcades to play games. We brought that into your lounge with surround sound speakers, with a total digital thing going from 16-bit to 32-bit digitalization. Just to cut a long story short there, we were in the high technology game, and what that actually meant was that people in the know, in the digital game, could actually take one of our DVD discs and they could copy them, or what we would call replicate them. But they could replicate them to very good quality. So in other words, the pirated game in quality was as good as our original disc, which is a bit problematic, because what was happening is these pirates were then selling globally in the market. They were selling these pirated copies at, let's just call it $3 to $5 a game for a disc. Our price was about 30 games because we had to absorb all the costs from development, distribution, marketing, and all those other costs. And how that totally disrupted and confused the consumer, because the consumer could not understand that they could buy a pirated game for $3 to $5, and your PlayStation was selling that same game at $30. So that was the first thing, and we had to learn, and we had to overcome that in various different ways. It wasn't something that you could turn the switch on and off and police.
No.
And I'm talking piracy on a global stage here. Sorry, yes, Chris?
I was just going to say, and more recently in your academic role, you've been doing a lot of research into startup failure. So what have you found is the most dominant reason for startup failure?
Well, Chris, that list is also quite big, and I don't want to be too controversial in just giving you a direct answer there. But what I've actually found is that probably the most prominent reason for startup failure is the wrong people doing entrepreneurship. Now, you might say anybody can do entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is a mindset. So it's not that just anybody can walk into it and say, look, I'm a 50-year-old individual, which I'm not, I'm older than that, but I'm just giving a scenario. I'm a 50-year-old individual. I've had a corporate career, and you know what? I'm tired of reporting to a boss. I want to be my own boss, and I want to now be an entrepreneur. If that person does not have the right mindset, there's failure at your door already. Because it's a total different mindset. But let me rather go on for the thing that assume that the person has got the right mindset. What is it that we see as a prominent reasons for failure? So in my role, I'm very fortunate that I get access to a lot of databases, and I get access to a lot of networks and so on internationally. And one of those is a thing called the Global Consortium of Entrepreneurship Centers. It's a global consortium of research. And one of the things we studied there were the root causes of startup failure. So I'm just going to mention just briefly a few of those. And I'm sure a lot of people, this will be ringing home to a lot of people. Probably the most prominent reason, other than people not being ready for entrepreneurship, was basic market assessment. We talk in entrepreneurship terms, we talk about opportunity evaluation gone wrong. So in other words, people thought there was a need for a product. They launched that product, and then they found out, hang on, somebody else has done the same thing that we're doing. Someone's doing it better, cheaper, faster, a lot more effective and efficient. So we take incorrect market assessment as a thing. And there are many ways to go about doing that opportunity evaluation. Another very important one, and this is very critical thing, is a lack of a business model.
Yeah.
We often talk about business propositions. What is it that you are giving or selling or going to try sell to the consumer? Isn't there somebody else doing it better than you? So how is it then you think you're actually going to win?
Yep.
An obvious one that's always in the top 5 of reasons for failure is financing and burning cash.
Yeah.
And just not having the finances to start with.
Yeah.
Others include lack of motivation, passion, too much pride. Now, people often don't see this, but I don't only refer to pride as in the person's pride in running their venture, but pride to pivot. When they see things aren't going that well and being obstinate and carrying on with that idea, instead of pivoting, changing it and moving aside slightly. So that failure to pivot is a very important thing.
Yeah.
Yourself being an engineer, you'd know this. Sometimes when you do launch, you launch with what we call in lean startup terminology, an MVP, a minimum viable product. You know, that spec product that hasn't been launched yet, but sometimes that spec product or that MVP is not functional, and therefore that could bring about failure. And I've seen this in Australian and New Zealand terminology is when entrepreneurs fail, so to say, people are relatively unforgiving. You know, they're not going to give you a second chance. Whereas in an American market, which is more entrepreneurship driven, failure is generally accepted, and learning from failure there is a very big thing. And here comes another one of my things that are often mentioned to my budding entrepreneurship students, Chris, is that a reminder that entrepreneurs do not fail. Their startups may fail, but entrepreneurs do not fail because they're always in spaces of uncertainty, high risk, and that type of thing.
Yeah. Well, that's terrific, Alex. Thanks very much for that, and we'll come back to you with some questions shortly. So we might move on to Beck now. Now, Beck, you've achieved a career that girls could never have dreamed of not all that long ago, and what makes your story even more intriguing is that Aussie rules football wasn't even the dominant sport where you grew up. Tell us a bit about how you came to be a success in AFLW whilst also being a success in digital marketing.
Yeah, look, I'm a bit of a country girl. I grew up in Wagga Wagga, so nice they named it twice, I like to say. I grew up in a really happy and loving family with 2 great role models in mum and dad, and I'm a middle child with an older brother and a younger sister. And as you said, I grew up in a rugby league loving family. Whilst I grew up in Wagga, I also spent a lot of time in Sydney. That's obviously rugby league heartland. So I'm proud to say I barrack for the Roosters, the mighty Sydney Roosters, but obviously still have that AFLW background. And growing up in the country, I played a lot of sport. I had a bit of sporting ability and quite a strong competitive streak. And my older brother and younger sister were also quite good athletes in their own right as well. In terms of the AFLW journey, I guess, in a nutshell, I'll never forget the day that I knew I was moving from Sydney to Melbourne. So at that time, I didn't quite know I was on the AFLW journey just yet, but I knew it was a goal of mine. So this is talking about 2018, 2019, and in this moment, I guess I feared failure. But I did a couple nights trial down in Melbourne at Punt Road. That was an insane experience as well. And I had a nervous sort of week to wait. When I went back to Sydney, I was just waiting for someone from Richmond to contact me, and I'll never forget the moment I got an email. I was working at the office, got the email. There was someone sitting next to me on my right. I just kept it really quiet to myself, finished the day, knocked off. I remember blasting the tunes on my commute back home, and I think it was ABBA, great album, that one. And I walked into my house and I said, "Mum, guess what?" And she turned around and she knew exactly what I was going to say. You know, the trial went successfully and I was sort of on my way to Melbourne, and in that moment I was just offered a place in the Richmond BFLW team. And at the moment I was obviously worried Am I going to find a new job? Can I find a place to live quick enough? There was so many worries and concerns, but I knew I was leaving the comfort of Sydney and family and friends and a great social life, but, you know, life begins outside your comfort zone. So long story short, through that move, I secured a contract for Richmond's inaugural AFLW team, and moving to Melbourne, I began to thrive in all aspects of life. And another aspect of that life is my world in the digital marketing world, which I really, really enjoy, because basically I love to authentically connect with people and I love to build those relationships. So through digital marketing, you get to meet really interesting people and tell their stories, which is something I'm very passionate about. So I feel very fortunate to live in two very different worlds at the same time.
That's great. And it's interesting with your sport. You said your family is also sporty, your brother and your sister. I'm not sure if you've read a book called Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, but among other things, he says that there's a lot of luck in getting into sport. And in fact, he says that success in sport often depends on what month you were born. Do you buy that argument?
I haven't actually read the book as of yet. It is on my reading list. I'm going through a few books in lockdown, but I haven't quite made it to that one just yet. I do believe in the saying, you know, the harder you work, the luckier you get. That's definitely top of mind whenever I'm training or playing. There's also another saying that I grew up with and was told constantly by my dad, and that's, you know, there are three types of people in this world: those that make it happen, those that watch it happen, and those that say, what happened? Growing up, I always try to make it happen, and I guess that's part of my AFLW story is I made it happen by, you know, reaching out for the trial, moving to Sydney and other bits and bobs. Yeah, there are a couple of sayings I firmly believe in, and, you know, being part of the Richmond AFLW inaugural team is something I'm incredibly proud of and will always hold dear to me. And obviously 2020 was our first season as a team, and looking at the win-loss column, we didn't win a single game out of 6 matches. So looking at that column, you say the season's a failure, but there are so many successes to have come out of 2020. So many young girls were blooded, so many girls with no AFLW experience like myself and Gabs. We got a chance. The group learned what elite levels are like, what elite standards are like, and so much more. So, you know, we're working incredibly hard for season 2021. Our pre-season started as soon as the 2020 season got cancelled. But yeah, I definitely believe the harder you work, the luckier you get, and you've got to make things happen.
Well, on that theme of making things happen, if we turn to your career as a marketing person, and in marketing you have to be outcome focused, so the success of a marketing campaign is measured in sales revenue, presumably. So what happens when the marketing campaign's an absolute dud? And, you know, have you coped with that sort of failure? Have you got any examples where you haven't made it happen?
Yeah, look, I think, you know, in a couple of the previous stories I've mentioned, it's all about having a crack. So, you know, whilst there is data and you can analyse that, and it's quite popular in the marketing world for obvious and valid reasons, sometimes data and trends can act as a bit of a guide, but you just have to have a crack at the end of the day. You have to try something different, think outside the box, and just have that crack, see what happens. And, you know, I guess there are two drawings. People are probably quite familiar with it, but, you know, the drawing of a straight line, what people think success looks like, but then next to it's that drawing of what success actually looks like, and it's the squiggly down, up, around, back up drawing. You know, marketing campaigns and strategies come and go, and you learn from every single one of them. But I guess I actually feel a bit of a failure saying I'm a marketer. I don't actually have a degree in the field. I sort of fell into it 3 or 4 years ago. But you know, from the first marketing gig I had at New South Wales Rugby Union, I was really proud of myself and the group of guys I work with. We were just the community development team, and we crafted messages and developed content to help display a unified organisation between New South Wales Rugby and New South Wales Waratahs. And then through that gig, I got my next job, which was a specifically marketing communications job, which was super exciting. There were some great clients as part of that gig, but that role, I didn't sort of feel valued or respected or, very much appreciated. And I think I failed myself by staying in that job for as long as I did. However, your original question, you said, how do you cope with that sort of failure? And I think as part of that job, I just worked as hard as I could and got as much as I could out of it, whilst also staying true to my values.
Oh, that's good. That's great. Now, I've got a little special quiz question for you, and it's based on that word that you used, messaging. What do you think the marketing message was or has been, showing us pictures of all of the AFL administrators and officials jetting off to Brisbane, while the rest of us here in Victoria, we've lost our MCG grand final, we can't even get out and about and bask in the sun or wine and dine. I mean, was that just bad optics, or what's the message we're meant to take home from that?
I guess it's a bit like that song, I get knocked down, but I get up again. It's to remind us of the good times, as they say. But at the end of the day, I think, tough people last and tough situations don't. So the grand final will return to the rightful place in due time.
Terrific. On that note, we might end it. Thanks very much, Beck. We'll come back to you with some questions, I'm sure. So, Gabby, you sound a bit like an overachiever. Australian junior girls volleyball team, a pianist, a physiotherapist, and now an AFLW player. I mean, is there anything you can't do? What about you fill us in on the successes and failures that you've endured?
Thanks, Chris. That's quite an introduction. So thank you to everyone tuning in tonight and to, all of our other speakers. But, it's a bit of an interesting one because I guess I don't necessarily think of all of those things as achievements. Probably similar to Beck. I'm just someone who tries really hard. And, if I say I'm going to give something a go, I'm giving it 100%, which is probably lucky because I'm actually not the most naturally talented athlete, or I'm not the best at my studies or anything like that. I'm just pretty proud that I probably work harder than the majority of people. And, I think that's kind of gotten me to where I am today. So, I grew up in Eltham in the northeastern suburbs of Victoria. And I was one of those kids who had stars in my eyes for my big brother. He was probably the opposite. He's very naturally gifted in the sporting kind of world, but I kind of got that competitive gene. So anything that he did, I wanted to do, and I wanted to do it better as well. So he started playing volleyball at the local high school. And I remember going to one of his first games and I thought, I reckon I could have a crack at this sport. Like, I reckon this looks pretty good. And we've got one of those backyards where you've kind of got the pool on one side, the neighbour's fence on the other, and this little patch of grass in the middle. And, we would spend hours and hours sort of out there, practicing. And I can very distinctly remember hitting a stray ball over the fence that smashed the next door neighbour's terracotta pot that they'd just bought, and having to be screamed at by them. But it did teach me to refine my skills pretty quickly. And that kind of led eventually when I got into high school, I ended up getting selected in the Victorian state junior team. And we went on to win the national championships, and that was probably my first real taste of sort of high-level sporting success. And, I just absolutely loved it. And we went on to win the next 3 years of nationals. And, I guess from that we just sort of developed this expectation to win. And, we kind of always were the best team. And I was lucky enough to kind of be a starting player a lot of the time. And, it was just a great, great time. So when I was 16, I was then super excited to get the call up to the Australian junior girls volleyball team. And, we kind of played a couple of warm-up tournaments sort of across Australia and New Zealand and some parts of Asia. But the first kind of real test we had was a tournament in China. And that was where you really knew they were sort of selecting the best 12 girls across the country. And, somehow I managed to be one of those. And, I can remember getting my Australian jersey with Seymour across the back of it, and I'd be wearing it around the house, and thought I was the absolute bee's knees. And then we actually got to China, and as a 16-year-old who hadn't really travelled outside the country much at all, I got hit with some pretty serious culture shock. Like, they talked about it before we went over there, but I can just remember getting off the plane and the smog was the first thing that hit me. You know, you can't see the sun. I grew up in leafy Eltham, and, you know, I didn't see a tree or a bird from the airport back to the hotel. And the other thing that sort of hits you is the people. They were just kind of everywhere. We were in a relatively poor part of China, and I remember seeing sort of beggars and homeless people and, you know, people having to go to the bathroom on the street and that sort of thing. And yeah, as a 16-year-old who's had a very lucky life so far, I just remember sort of being completely overwhelmed by it all. But then to go with that, when you sort of select the best 12 girls in Australia, all of a sudden that sort of starting 6th spot becomes a whole lot harder. And the first game we played over there, I actually didn't get onto the court at all. I was on the bench the whole game, and that was just something I'd never experienced. And I can remember locking myself in the bathroom when we got back to the hotel and crying and feeling so sorry for myself because it was just so unfair. And I just wanted to call mum and dad and, you know, talk to them. But of course, there's no reception. And in China, you're not allowed to have Facebook either. So I kind of had no way to contact them. And yeah, I guess it did teach me some lessons about resilience pretty quickly. I'd love to say that story sort of had a happy ending, but yeah, it really didn't. I did get on the court in the end, which was good, but we got absolutely smashed every game. Like, I'm talking, if anyone knows anything about volleyball, sets are normally played to 25, and we were ecstatic if we made it to 10 points. Like, girls were incredibly good. I can also remember getting taught a pretty good lesson about what it means to be an elite athlete when I was absolutely craving the taste of Western food. We kind of, you know, been at the hotel and they were providing food, and it was all Asian kind of cuisine, which was absolutely delicious. But yeah, I had grown up in a very European kind of background, and I just really wanted something familiar. And we had an afternoon off to go and sort of explore the streets of China. And I remember finding a Pizza Hut and thinking, oh, like, we are on here. So I went in and ordered myself a pizza, but unfortunately the coaches were also passing the shop at the time. And yeah, I remember when I got back to the hotel, I had to stand up in front of the team and explain what I'd done and the poor choices I'd made around being an elite athlete. So yeah, again, something that you kind of don't forget, but I'm also pretty grateful for it now in terms of from a football perspective. I sort of see some of the other girls who haven't had this experience in the past make some of these same, you know, mistakes and that sort of thing. And you just sort of realise how much you've kind of learnt from that. Because I think the other big thing I sort of learnt from my time over there was what it actually took to be the best in the world. And I remember sort of talking to some of the coaches from some of the best teams over there, like China, Japan, Korea, and their girls, 16 years as well, were training about 5 hours a day. And I just remember thinking at the time, like, that is just unbelievable. And yeah, I just don't think that I was sort of prepared to be doing that at the time either. But yeah, I can now look back and think, gee, wow, that was really the amount of time and effort that it has to take to sort of be the best at something. And yeah, I guess that's probably something now that I'm really proud to put into my footy. Like, I'll have a ball in my hands every day. I'm still kind of learning the craft and that sort of thing. But yeah, it really is one of those things that sort of requires a lot of diligence and, yeah, hours to be put into it. So, yeah, my footy journey was a bit less conventional. I pretty much saw a Facebook page sort of at the end of 2018, it would have been, which was a talent scouting day for the VFLW program. And a bit naively, because I'd never kicked a footy before in my life, I kind of thought, oh, yeah, like, footy would be all right. This could be a bit of fun. How far can I get with this? So, yeah, I went to this trial day. I didn't have any boots yet because I kind of thought they were a bit of a non-essential item. And, yeah, I remember getting to the trial and one of the coaches sort of giving me the look up and down and looking at my footwear and looking around and seeing, yeah, okay, everyone else did wear their boots. So knew I'd kind of messed up there. And yeah, I was absolutely terrible at that trial. I was just running around like a headless chook. I could barely sort of kick the ball off my feet. But because of the volleyball background, and I've done a bit of running in the past as well, the things I could do was jump high. And I also had a pretty good aerobic base. And yeah, somehow I then got a spot on Richmond's VFLW list, and they pretty much said, like, no guarantees, we know you haven't played footy, but yeah, let's see how you go with a couple of months of training under your belt. And yeah, I just sort of took that opportunity and ran for the hills. Like, I was practicing every day. I was getting to training early to get one of the coaches to teach me how to kick. And yeah, somehow that then led me to debut up in Darwin in my first VFLW game. And yeah, I had one of those debuts. There's sort of been a couple in the AFL this year where they just go out and they're just so pumped to be there and so excited about that opportunity that they just kind of don't care what happens, and you just see them playing so fearlessly. And yeah, you think, wow, that person looks really good. And yeah, from that, a couple of games later, I then got signed to Richmond's AFLW list as a cross-code rookie. So yeah, it was kind of like all these lessons I'd learned from volleyball and a past sporting background had then allowed me to sort of, jump a couple of steps and yeah, succeed in the AFLW.
Well, that's very interesting. And of course, it must be devastating that you're not playing this year. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like I was sort of just starting to get the hang of it. But at the same time, it's also kind of been a blessing, because I feel like in some ways I've got, 22 years of skills to make up for, because I am a bit of a latecomer to footy. So, yeah, I've almost gone back to the start of my journey and been kicking the ball in the backyard and got the brother outside again. So, yeah, in that way, it's actually been pretty cool. But I can't wait to get back as well.
Well, let's turn for a minute to your career as a physiotherapist. One of the things that I do in my role as Professor of Practice in Engineering at La Trobe Uni is try and encourage school kids to study maths and science, or the so-called STEM subjects, so that they'll choose a technical career, whether it be in engineering or one of the other science subjects. I'm interested to hear, what was it that happened to you and when that made you choose a career of physiotherapy? What influenced that decision?
Yeah. Well, I guess as an athlete growing up, I was kind of always in the physio's office. Like, I had that many little injuries and sprains and that sort of thing. And I kind of thought, oh, yeah, like, these people work with athletes, that's exactly what I want to do. But yeah, it was kind of an interesting one, because on one of my last physio placements, I was at a sports medicine clinic, and I was really lucky. I got to shadow one of the best sports physios in Victoria. And I thought, oh, you beauty, this is exactly what I want to do. But when I actually shadowed them, I kind of then realised what the commitment was of a sports physio. And, you had to go to all the games, you had to go to all the trainings and put in all this time, but you didn't actually get to play the sport. And that was sort of a bit of a revelation moment for me, where I thought, oh, actually, I don't think I'm ready to be the physio yet. I actually want to be, the athlete and that sort of side of things. So, yeah, it's pretty cool that I kind of get to do both at the moment. I can definitely say at the moment that physio probably does take sort of a second tier to footy, because I just kind of figure, you've only got 10, 15 years max to, take the opportunity as a professional athlete. And yeah, physio is always going to be there in the background for me. And yeah, I'll pick it up when I'm ready to. Okay.
And finally, I've got a little bit of a quiz question for you. We've got so many of our AFL players on the male side that are covered in tattoos. How do tattoos make a footballer play better footy?
Yeah, I think statistically having a tattoo makes you about 10% tougher is the official maths behind it.
Is that right?
Yeah. If I thought I could pull one off, I'd be absolutely covered in them. But, yeah, I don't know how Mother Seymour would like that, so I'll keep the skin nice and clear for now.
I like your answer. Thanks so much, Gabby. That's great. And Adrian, last but not least, you've had an amazing international career living in the US and mixing with the big names like American Express, Dow Jones, MIT, the New York Times, and the list goes on. But your life wasn't always in the fast lane. In fact, You and I discovered recently that we were both students at the same time at the Bendigo Institute of Technology. Tell us what happened to you at that time and where it led you.
Oh, thank you, Chris. It's great to be here, and it's great to see you again after, 50 years?
Oh, don't tell anyone.
Well, I'm going to perhaps take a little different approach tonight in how I respond to this invitation. Like Andrew, I've grown up and grown old with dyslexia and a multitude of other learning disabilities. And school was never a pleasant place for me. As Chris said, we met, about 50 years ago at the BIT, Bendigo Institute of Technology, down on McRae Street. Chris, you were in engineering, and you've gone on to have a brilliant career in education and academia, and in the professional world as well, in the year at the BIT, and went to America. The grass is always greener, as they say. Failure struck early for me. My life started in Bendigo on Brougham Street in the 1950s, and it almost ended on Brougham Street, quite literally, when at the age of 5, I was run over by a large black sedan as I attempted to leap it in a single bound as it passed by me in front of our family home. I was wearing my red Superman cape, and everything seemed possible at that young age, until I came crawling out, bruised and scraped from underneath the aforementioned sedan, only to be greeted by a very emotional and upset and even angry mother, who added to my pain and embarrassment by dragging me in the house and pounding my rape. Not an auspicious start to life as a superhero on Brougham Street. That failed attempt seemed to be a foreshadowing of things to come in my life. During those formative years, my parents tried to settle me into 3 different primary schools around Bendigo before they or we found a home at Quarry Hill, where I started grade 1 in rural school. A classroom with students, 4 actually, in each of the 6 grades, 1 through 6, and the same teacher for 6 years. It was a school within a school. Fortunately for me, I seemed to thrive in that unique environment. That singular educational experience became the hallmark of my academic life, and to this day was the only institution from which I graduated. And until recently, I had thought that school was for gifted students. That might be my ego involved. But now, having a son, as I've watched him go through education and into his adulthood, I see that his educational challenges have pretty much mirrored mine. And I can only now assume, with hindsight, that that school was very much for children with learning disabilities. Saving a taste of that success, I went on to the Bendigo High School in Rosalind Park and failed 3rd and 5th forms and dropped out. With a failing report card and a great deal of fear, with the thought of having to face my mother, with another year failed grade, I gathered together a portfolio of artwork, sketches, and paintings, and walked through Rosalind Park to the BIT. After an evaluation of that portfolio, I was granted a seat in the following year's class, which I walked away from after failing my 2nd year at the BIT. So Chris managed to graduate. I left with my tail between my legs. My only claim to fame during those 2 years was to successfully orchestrate 3 raids late at night on the Bendigo City Pound to rescue all the imprisoned dogs. The story made front page news in the Bendigo Advertiser, after each raid, and the perpetrator remained until this day unknown. It was nothing short of a miracle that I was accepted into a university in America, where clearly they had no way of evaluating my Australian transcripts. School remained uninteresting, and predictably boring for me. And within about 18 months of university, I dropped out to open a design studio, quite illegally in America. I was there on a student visa, which didn't allow for employment or work of any kind. That naive decision to open a studio led me to the meeting of my first wife, and 6 years later, at the age of 30, being offered a partnership in an internationally renowned design studio in New York City, with offices in New York, Connecticut, and San Francisco. After accepting the partnership offer, I moved my family to New York to take on the creative and managerial responsibilities of the New York office. Life seemed pretty perfect. However, I learned a long time ago that there is a pattern in all things. And once again, a familiar pattern was revealing itself to me. Before the move to New York, however, I had images in my mind, and remember, this is a boy who thought he could fly. I had images of walking down Wall Street or Madison Avenue with a fine briefcase in my hand, which I didn't yet own because I couldn't afford a fine briefcase, on my way to some brilliant creative presentation which I'd conceived, or to some important client meeting. However, that dream never really became my reality at that time. Within a few weeks of accepting the partner in this firm, in consultation with my accountant, we shockingly came to the realization that we were broke. The company was, in fact, some hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. When I broke the news to my new partner, who had built this business over many years, he being one of New York's most celebrated designers, he claimed ignorance, saying he wasn't aware of the financial problems we now faced. Had I been deceived, taken advantage of, or was it an honest mistake? Another of life's lessons was unfolding, that there must needs be opposition in all things. I had a decision to make. Leave the ship back to the safe harbor we had enjoyed in the Rocky Mountains, or stay and tough it out until hopefully the business was solvent again. In consultation with my wife, we chose to stay. This meant no income for months until the debt was paid off and the reputation of the company restored. It meant long days and nights in the city that never sleeps, until we had enough new business to build a more stable future. The partner who claimed ignorance regarding the financial health of that company those many years ago is still a dear friend to this day. He recently lost his wife to cancer, and we have cried together over his loss. I've learned that everything in life is about relationships. Everything. Designer selection and its relationship to the page and its margins is paramount. To an architect, it may be the relationship of the height to the length and depth of the space, and how light interacts within those voids. And to the musician, it may be the relationship of the notes to the intervals or the spaces between the notes, where beauty is found. Everything is about relationships. Now, our decision to stay in New York led to many wonderful relationships. For the most important kind, the human kind, I paid my dues, and I've had the opportunity to work with some remarkable people and create friendships that have endured that have led to new life lessons, both successes and failures. To work in design as a design director and in advertising as an art director. And there are differences between those two worlds. My first love is design. Not that I was formally trained in any of these disciplines. Good design is principle-based, and I won't take the time to get into the long list of principles. Advertising can be principle-based, but is most often strategy-driven. Hunter S. Thompson, a curious man, an author and a journalist, once said of television, and the statement has been co-opted by the advertising world, which has traditionally relied upon television as a medium to reach the masses, said this: advertising is a cruel and shallow money trench, a long plastic way where thieves are free and good men die like dogs. Having straddled the fence and worked in both worlds, I tend to agree with Thompson's assessment of that world. But advertising is where the money and power is. 9 out of 10 campaigns that are produced never see the light of day. So the odds of producing a successful campaign are very slim. Several years ago, I was commissioned to create the celebrity campaign for American Express. American Express believes they own values. They're not a traditional credit card company, so they can own the high ground. It required me working with the agency of record in New York. I developed the campaign and hired a renowned photographer. The client, however, chose on this occasion, and the celebrities then chose the location of the photo shoot, Paris. Now, a typical photo shoot like this costs anywhere in the neighborhood of $500,000 to produce. That does not include the media buy. That's just the cost of getting a good shot. And we had 11 days to get it organized and to get a crew of 18 to Paris to get the good shot. And due to last-minute timing demands of the client, there was no time to secure the necessary permits from the Parisian government to orchestrate a shoot in the city. So we literally went on a wing and a prayer to photograph Tom Ford, fashion designer extraordinaire, and Domenico del Sol. These two men were very close professional friends. And Hugh, I think, can you bring up that slide? I think I can see it over there. There's Tom and there's Domenico. Fast forward now to the day after the photo shoot, and I'm walking through the JFK airport the morning after our trip to Paris, when the client called and asked me to describe the shot to him. He hadn't yet seen it. As I described the shot, he interrupted me and said, "You're fired." He considered the ad an epic failure. Why? Because we'd gone to Paris, and there was no Paris to be seen in that shot. It could have been taken anywhere in the world, he said. Doesn't matter. The talent, Domenico Sol, chose the location, Paris. The art director was to blame. An epic failure as it was, the ad still ran internationally. When the client has just spent $500,000 to get that shot, and there's a media buy of 10, if not hundreds of millions around the globe to run that ad in every major publication in the world, they're going to run with the shot. A few years later, epic failure aside, I was again asked to art direct another celebrity campaign for the same client. The circumstances surrounding this photo shoot were similar. There was no time. The client selected the talent, and the talent demanded low. Call me a slow learner. Usually my role is to make all of those decisions, to choose the talent and to choose the locations that suit that particular shoot and our marketing objectives. And if you can bring up the Beyonce ad, which I think I can see there, it's about the size of a postage stamp from where I'm sitting. So as I arrived at this tiny little airport in North Carolina to direct the photo shoot of Beyonce, the parents happened to be there on the shoot, which we didn't anticipate, and that added another level of complexity to this rather delicate moment. We were on this runway. We had a plane aligned in the right direction. We had a couple of exotic cars there. And within 2 hours, which was all Beyonce gave us to capture this, we positioned the mother inside the car since she came. Why not use her? And Beyonce walking towards the vehicle. We pulled that off in about 2 hours. Normally, a photo shoot of that complexity takes 24 to 48 hours, and we shoot it in multiple different situations. We didn't have that luxury of time. And typical of the last campaign, the preceding campaign, as I got to the airport in North Carolina to fly home, my cell phone rang. I found a quiet corner, propped myself against the wall, and sat down on the floor, and again described the shot to the client and was promptly fired. The client this time said, and I quote, "This is a celebrity and glamour shot. We didn't want a glamour shot of Beyonce. Sorry, the brand. You don't see her any other way. Doesn't matter, Adrian. You're fired." Hard lessons for an art director to learn. Failure can take on many forms, as I think we all know, and it comes in a multitude of flavors. It can be hard, political, exacting, brutal, even humiliating, unfair, confidence busting, painful, and yes, even epic. Sometimes it is self-made. Sometimes it is beyond our control and is inflicted on us. Always it is a learning opportunity. Opposition, as I mentioned earlier, and failure are both part of life. Be not afraid, as the mandate says. Opposition and failure present moments for transition. When bad things pass away, new things are born. They are moments of creativity. I take comfort in the words of a gentleman that I've loved for many years, Ken Robinson, an English gentleman, a scholar, a teacher, and author. And he had this to say about creativity. "I firmly believe that you cannot be creative without acting intelligently. Similarly, the highest form of intelligence is thinking creatively." I've often used the quote in the classroom at the university I dropped out of as a young husband. The school had contacted me several decades ago and invited me to teach. There's more than a little irony in that, I think. And because I left to teach, they gave me a degree. And in June of this year, 35 years later, I stepped away from academia, having finally learned to love the classroom and school. And now I'm back in Bendigo with my beautiful and talented wife, Christina, and I'm once again living happily on Brougham Street. But unfortunately, the whereabouts of my red Superman cape remains a mystery to this day.
That is an amazing story, Adrian. Thanks so much. That's incredible.
Thank you.
And what about regrets? I mean, do you have any regrets with such an amazing story of your life?
Oh goodness, yeah. There's always regrets. One of the things that I failed to learn as a young director, designer, director, was to never burn bridges. It took me a long time to learn that lesson. I frequently became impatient with clients and would often walk away from remarkable opportunities to do some very, very brilliant creative work because of my impatience with the client. If they didn't see the world as I saw the world, if they didn't see the solutions as I saw the solutions they needed, I would, on occasion, resign an account. As I grew up a little bit and gained a little bit of maturity, I learned that you can nurture those relationships and still get good results.
Sound advice. I think there's a bit of that in all of us. Now, I've got a little quiz question, and I preface it by saying that it's a little bit unfair on you. But your question is that having lived in the US for so long,
oh goodness,
would you nominate who has been the biggest failure amongst the US presidents?
I thought it wasn't polite to talk about politics.
Oh no, we love talking politics here in Bendigo.
Okay, well, that's an easy one to answer. One word: Trump.
Right.
Okay. I refer to him frequently, the trumpet.
Right.
And as I've said many times, if his lips are moving, he's lying.
Okay, well, we might leave at that point. Thanks, Adrian. Thanks again very much. A fantastic story. Now, we have some questions from you, the audience, and thanks so much to those of you who have sent questions in. And the first question comes from Paul. Wonderful stuff. When does Andrew think we should talk freely to kids? Unfortunately, there's a screen over the printing. I better go to the other one. Alex, do you think fear of failure correlates with perceived low level of resilience that is attributed to generation X, Y, and Z? Alex, did you get the question?
On mute.
Oh, Chris, can you repeat that, please?
Do you think fear of failure correlates with a perceived low level of resilience that is attributed to generation X, Y, and Z? In other words, having a bit of a dig at X, Y, and Zs.
Not at all. Different strokes and so on. Fear of failure increases with age. And that's a fact because people have less time to participate in startups or to make a stuff up or to fail and then bounce back again. So it's not really whether it's youth entrepreneurship, senior entrepreneurship, and so on. What I'd like to just say regarding that is there's another statistic that's out as well, that the average age of the successful entrepreneur is 45 years.
Right.
So entrepreneurship is not necessarily only for youth, only for senior people. It's basically for anybody.
Terrific. Thanks, Alex. Now, I'll go back to that question from Paul, and it's for Andrew. When does Andrew think we should talk freely to kids and students about failure? Is the education system geared to failure? Andrew.
Great question. No, the education system is not geared to failure. The education system principally is geared around producing very compliant, very disciplined, very well learned and read students. And it is changing now where we're adopting more of the design principles, design methodology, design thinking into STEAM, but it's not at a fast enough rate because we're still bound by a system that says, okay, if you achieve the highest score, then you top of the class, and then you can go on to the next level of education. But that is just one form of learning. It doesn't take into account the other ways that we can create and learn and think about the world. It is basically a system that's nearly 2,500 years in the making, where people learn facts, figures, then recite them, and that means that you're learned, well-educated. But actually what we're learning is in this world that's changing so quickly, what we learn as fact is now being questioned and challenged. and needs to be explored, and needs to be explored in a different way. Rather than being given the answer, we need to actually understand how we unlock problems. And so this conversation is starting to happen, but it's sort of depleted in its impact because we still have this metric system that's based. And of course, as parents, and speaking as a parent myself, you get sucked into this. You want to know what the scores are. You want to know where your child sits in the average rankings and ratings. It's built into our society that you get a high score, you're going to have a good career. And actually, hopefully what I introduced in that little presentation at the start is that thinking differently has a lot of power as well and has a lot of great impact. And we should celebrate that. So failure is a form of discovery. Let's talk about it. Let's embrace it. Let's embrace how discovery can change this world.
Great, good. Thanks, Andrew. There's one question now from Mark for Beck and Gabby. What is the one piece of wisdom that you would pass on to all the young sports people who are aspiring to the elite level? So perhaps a quick answer from the two girls.
Do you want to go, Gab? Do you want to kick it off?
Good handball there.
Your name's first on the list, Beck. I think it's all yours.
Okay, I'm happy to go. I think in response to that question, it comes down to two things. If I can cheat and have two pieces of advice, it's to work unbelievably hard. You have to be prepared to dedicate yourself day and night and sacrifice like you never thought to get to the elite levels. But at the end of the day, all that hard work has to be worth it, and you have to have fun. So if it's not fun, it's not worth doing. So I think my two pieces of advice would be hard work and make sure you're having fun at the same time.
Great. Gabby?
Yeah, probably along a similar line to Beck. I just think if you're going to have a crack at it, have a real crack, and just know that, rocking up to training in terms of the hours that you're designed probably isn't going to be enough to cut it, because that's what everyone else is doing. You've got to do more than that. To be the best, you've got to do more than the rest.
Terrific. Oh, thanks for that. Now, Adrian, here's a question for you from Monique. Did you feel like an imposter in the USA when you first arrived there? What was your light bulb moment? When did you know that things were going to be okay? That's assuming that they were okay.
Well, the first part of the question, again, Chris, I've got the second part. What's the first part of the question?
Did you feel like an imposter in the USA?
No, I certainly felt like a foreigner because I pronounced banana correctly. I went into a milk bar to get a shake, and I asked for banana malt. I had to repeat myself 10 times, and it became incredibly frustrating. So I don't think I ever felt like an imposter. I had enough confidence, I think, coming from Australia to fit in over there as much as I chose to fit in. To the second part of the question, I owe my confidence to one man, Mr. Butner, at that Quarry Hill Primary School, who, when I was in his fourth grade, I had him for 6 years. He kept me after class one day and asked what I wanted to do when I grew up. And I said to him profoundly, I think I'd like to be a tram conductor. I like those big leather bags and I'd like to punch the tickets. His advice was to become a commercial artist, which today is an art director or a designer in that world. And when he said that to me and described what a designer did, a light bulb literally went on in that young boy from school that night, and I don't think my feet touched the ground. I knew from that moment on what I had to do, and I never looked back.
Thanks, Adrian. We've got a question here for Alex from, again, Monique. How have advancements in technology created a more challenging environment for startups?
Well, I think that's pretty basic, that most successful startups and dynamic startups are actually in technology disruption. So if they're not that field, they're not actually doing much new and changing the way. And I don't like using the the big obvious examples, but how Netflix totally disrupted the video stores. How how Spotify has totally disrupted the way we listen to music and so on. And there were a lot of small startups that were involved in those big businesses doing that. Yes, they do now regulate the industry, but the small businesses and the new startups are going to now disrupt the way Netflix do things, for example. So technology, whether it's you aggregate technology, whether you use technology in your startup, it's just a given. If you don't understand technology, I suggest everybody learn what it's about and how to overcome those hurdles.
Terrific. Thanks, Alex. And I think our last question is maybe not. See how we go for time. Gabby, with your many passions, how do you decide what to put your energy into? You seem to have so many things on the go.
Yeah, definitely. And I kind of think that it's because I've got so many, different things that I'm interested in. Like, that's kind of what keeps me passionate as well. But yeah, anyone who knows me well knows that I kind of always carry my diary on me. And I'm one of those people who, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, I've got my whole day written out and everything I'm going to tick off. So yeah, I think when you structure your time and sort of plan different things, it's pretty amazing the amount of things that you can kind of fit in. But yeah, sometimes I look back and think, I actually did a lot, last week. But yeah, structure is, really key for me.
And we didn't mention the marathon running. You do that as well.
I should correct you and say marathon running.
Oh, I see.
Marathon. But yeah, again, just a little bit of a side project. But yeah, I would highly recommend to anyone who's considered doing a marathon to do it, because the feeling when you cross the line is, unbelievable. It's hours and hours of work that you've put in. And yeah, I speak for a lot of people, I think, when you get to sort of that 25, 30K mark and think, oh, God, that ad that's been on TV about the guy, riding over the bridge and he looks up on his phone, how long is there to go? And there's still 7 kilometres. I really feel for that guy in that ad, because it's a pretty shocking feeling when there's still a long way to go home.
Terrific. Thanks, Gabby. Well, that's all we have time for. You can access the 2020 BIIF app through your browser or your mobile device to add more free sessions. Further details can be found at biif.com.au, including a session with Festival of Failure's very own Alex Moritz on September the 16th around seniorpreneurs, where we will learn how and why senior entrepreneurship is the fastest growing sector in Australia and how this sector may be one of the most viable and valuable solutions for our older workforce. Now, the winner of tonight's quiz is Andrew for his answer on TELUS and winning the drag race. We thank our guest speakers, Andrew Jones, Rebecca Miller, Alex Moritz, Gabriel Seymour and Adrian Pulfer. And thanks again to our sponsor, Australian Turntable Company, and our contributors to the Richmond Football Club, New 21, Iconic Collective and La Trobe University. Thank you for joining us and good night.